The 1990s were supposed to be the decade that killed excitement. Minivans were everywhere, grunge was on the radio, and the golden age of American muscle felt like a distant memory buried somewhere under a pile of emissions regulations and side impact door beams. But here's what the history books don't tell you. Hidden inside the most forgettable, most ordinary-looking cars of that decade were engines, suspensions, and performance packages that would have made a 1969 Camaro driver nervous. These are the sleepers, the wolves in sheep's clothing, the cars that embarrassed Corvettes from the outside lane while wearing a grandma's grocery getter disguise. This is the story of 15 unknown sleeper cars from the 1990s that almost nobody saw coming. Number 15. The 1994 Chevrolet Impala SS. A car that wasn't exactly a secret, but somehow still managed to fly completely under the radar of an entire generation of performance enthusiasts who were too busy staring at import tuners to notice. The 1994 Chevrolet Impala SS arrived dressed in all black, sitting lower than a standard Caprice, and wearing just enough chrome to catch a streetlight. That was it. No hood scoops, no racing stripes, no wing that could double as a helicopter landing pad. Just a big black American sedan that looked like it belonged in an unmarked government fleet. Under that long hood lived the LT1, a 5.7-liter V8 borrowed directly from the Corvette, producing 260 horsepower and 330 pound-feet of torque. In a car tipping the scales at over 4,000 pounds, that translated into 0 to 60 in 6.5 seconds and quarter-mile times in the low 15-second range. People at stoplights never saw it coming. They still don't. The Impala SS remains one of the most underappreciated American performance sedans ever built, and the fact that most people still confuse it with a standard Caprice is exactly what makes it qualify for this list. Number 14, the 1993 Buick Roadmaster estate wagon. Yes, a station wagon with wood paneling on the sides. Bear with me here. The 1993 Buick Roadmaster estate wagon is the single greatest practical joke ever played on the American automotive public. From the outside, it looked like the transportation of choice for a father of 6 heading to a Little League game in suburban Ohio. The fake wood paneling on the doors practically screamed harmless. It whispered sensible. It suggested a man who had given up on excitement and made peace with cargo space. What it did not suggest was the LT1 V8 sitting under that enormous hood, the same 5.7-liter engine that powered the Corvette, the same engine that found its way into the Impala SS and the Camaro Z28, producing 260 horsepower in a vehicle that, by all rights, should have been powered by something apologetic and 4-cylindered. The Roadmaster wagon could pull low 15-second quarter miles. It had rear-wheel drive, a limited slip differential, and a suspension tuned just firmly enough to remind you that Buick engineers had not completely abandoned their souls. Nobody raced a station wagon with fake wood paneling in 1993, which meant that anyone who owned one of these had the most devastating secret weapon in the history of American parking lots. The Roadmaster estate wagon is not just a sleeper, it is the patron saint of sleepers. Number 13. The 1996 Ford Taurus SHO. Ford built the Taurus to be the most invisible car in America, and for the most part, they succeeded spectacularly. The Taurus was the beige wallpaper of the automotive world. It was the car you drove when you wanted nobody, including yourself, to think about transportation. Then Ford handed the project to Yamaha. The super high output Taurus, known as the SHO, arrived in 1989, but by 1996 it had evolved into something genuinely threatening. The third-generation SHO carried a 3.4-liter Yamaha-built V8, producing 235 horsepower. That engine breathed through dual overhead camshafts and revved to 7,500 RPM with a mechanical shriek that had absolutely no business coming out of something that looked like a rental car. 0 to 60 happened in under 6 seconds. The quarter mile disappeared in the mid-14-second range. The suspension was tuned for actual cornering, with stiffer springs and precise steering that made the Taurus feel like a completely different animal underneath its spectacularly boring exterior. Here's the thing about the SHO that separates it from most sleepers. It didn't just go fast in a straight line. It handled, it cornered, it embarrassed European sports sedans that cost 3 times as much. Ford managed to hide a genuine driver's car inside a fleet vehicle disguise, so convincing that most mechanics didn't even recognize what they were working on. The SHO remains one of the greatest automotive con jobs of the entire decade. Number 12. The 1995 Dodge Neon ACR. Now, before you close the video, hear me out. The Dodge Neon was, by almost every measurable standard, an economy car. It was small, it was cheap, it had a name that sounded like a gas station sign, and it was marketed to people who cared more about monthly payments than horsepower. Nobody feared the Neon. Nobody lost sleep wondering if a Neon was going to embarrass them at a track day. The ACR package changed that equation entirely. ACR stood for American Club Racer, and Dodge built it specifically for SCCA autocross and road racing competition. The 2-liter 4-cylinder engine was nothing revolutionary at 150 horsepower, but the ACR package stripped out the sound, deadening, deleted the air conditioning, stiffened the suspension dramatically, and installed a close-ratio 5-speed manual transmission with a shorter final drive ratio. The result was a car that weighed next to nothing, and cornered with a precision that made sports cars costing 5 times as much feel clumsy and overweight. On a road course, the Neon ACR was genuinely terrifying to chase because it simply refused to slow down through corners. It was ugly, it was loud without the sound deadening, and it would absolutely humiliate your Miata on the right track. That is the sleeper definition in its purest form. Number 11. The 1998 Oldsmobile Intrigue, GLS. Oldsmobile in 1998 was a brand with an identity crisis roughly the size of the Great Lakes. They were trying to shed their reputation as the car your dentist drove to work, while simultaneously refusing to build anything that might actually excite somebody under the age of 55. The Intrigue GLS was their best attempt at threading that needle, and it was considerably better than anyone gave it credit for. Under the hood lived a 3.5-liter dual overhead cam V8-derived V6 producing 215 horsepower. That engine came directly from the Aurora V8 program, essentially a surgically shortened version of one of the most sophisticated American engines of the decade. It revved cleanly, made its power high in the range, and sounded considerably more serious than anything wearing an Oldsmobile badge had any right to sound. The chassis was taut and well-sorted, with steering that actually communicated road texture and a suspension that handled corners without the dramatic body roll that plagued most American sedans of the era. 0 to 60 came in around 7 seconds, which sounds modest until you remember this was a mid-size family sedan that nobody at the stoplight was taking seriously. The Intrigue GLS proved Oldsmobile still had engineers with real ideas. Unfortunately, the brand was discontinued before those ideas could save it. Number 10. The 1994 GMC Typhoon. Technically, this one carried over from 1991, but the 1994 versions represent the final and most refined expression of what remains one of the most insane things General Motors ever bolted together and called a truck. The GMC Typhoon took a compact SUV, the kind of vehicle people bought to feel practical and outdoorsy and responsible, and dropped a turbocharged 4.3-liter V6 producing 280 horsepower into it. Then they added all-wheel drive. Then they tuned the suspension low and stiff. Then they acted like they had done nothing unusual at all. 0 to 60 happened in 4.3 seconds. Read that again. 4.3 seconds. In 1991, when the Typhoon launched, that made it one of the fastest production vehicles on the planet. Faster than a Corvette off the line, faster than a Ferrari 348, faster than anything reasonable had any business being. The all-wheel drive system meant it launched without drama, without wheel spin, without telegraphing its intentions to whatever unfortunate Mustang happened to be sitting next to it at the light. The Typhoon just left. Quietly, completely, and with the casual indifference of a vehicle that knew exactly how fast it was and felt no need to announce it with hood scoops or ground effects. Only 4,800 were ever built. Every single one is a miracle. Number 9. The 1997 Pontiac Firebird formula. While the Trans Am spent the entire decade screaming for attention with its screaming chicken hood graphics and aggressive body kit, The Formula sat quietly beside it in the showroom, wearing a cleaner, simpler face and offering nearly identical performance for considerably less money and considerably less public ridicule. The 1997 Formula carried the LT1 V8, producing 285 horsepower in standard form, with the LS1 arriving for 1998 and pushing that number to 305. The suspension was shared with the performance-oriented Trans Am packages, meaning this was a car with genuine road course capability hiding inside what most people dismissed as a cheaper Pontiac coupe. Without the Trans Am's body kit and graphics, the Formula looked almost anonymous. A long hood, a fastback roofline, and an exhaust note that suggested something interesting might be happening mechanically, without outright declaring war on the neighborhood noise ordinance. Quarter-mile times in the mid-13-second range. 0 to 60 under 5.5 seconds. Brakes that could haul it down from triple-digit speeds without complaint. The Formula was the Firebird for people who understood that the fastest car in any race is the one that nobody sees coming. It never got the recognition it deserved, which, if you think about it, is precisely the point. Number 8. The 1996 Chevrolet Caprice 9 C1 Police Package. This one requires a small confession. The 9C1 was not a car you could walk into a dealership and buy. Chevrolet sold it exclusively to law enforcement agencies, which is exactly why it belongs on this list and exactly why it haunts the nightmares of anyone who has ever been pulled over on an empty interstate at 2 in the morning. The 9C1 police package turned the already capable Caprice into something genuinely alarming. The LT1 V8 was tuned for sustained high-speed pursuit rather than showroom statistics, producing 260 horsepower that felt considerably more urgent than the civilian version. The transmission was recalibrated for faster, more aggressive shift points. The suspension was rebuilt for stability at speeds that would have the standard Caprice doing impressions of a boat in heavy weather. When these cars retired from police service and filtered into the civilian used market during the late 1990s, enthusiasts who knew the code bought them immediately, because what you got was a purpose-built performance sedan with heavy-duty cooling, upgraded brakes, and a powertrain sorted by engineers who had one job: make this car fast enough to catch other fast cars, and never ever let it break down while doing it. The 9C1 is the sleeper that was actually built to chase sleepers. There is a beautiful irony somewhere in that sentence. Number 7. The 1993 Cadillac 60 Special. Cadillac in the early 1990s was deep in the middle of an identity crisis that made the Oldsmobile situation look stable by comparison. They were trying to recapture relevance, attract younger buyers, and still maintain the dignity expected of a brand that had spent decades being the automotive definition of luxury and achievement. The 60 Special was their attempt at a performance luxury sedan, and it was far better than its complete absence from modern automotive conversation would suggest. The Northstar V8 produced 295 horsepower and 290 pound-feet of torque. It revved freely, made a genuinely wonderful sound under hard acceleration, and delivered 0 to 60 times in the mid-6-second range. That was Corvette-adjacent territory wearing a Cadillac suit. The chassis was sorted with a road-tuned suspension that balanced comfort and control better than anything Cadillac had produced in years. The steering had actual weight and feedback. The brakes were powerful and fade-resistant. Nobody dragged a 60 Special. Nobody expected a Cadillac with wire wheel covers and a formal roofline to be a threat. That was the entire point. The 60 Special was a gentleman's sleeper for a generation of buyers who had grown up enough to want their speed delivered quietly and their dignity kept firmly intact. Number 6. The 1995 Mercury Villager Estate. Look, I know what you're thinking. And yes, a minivan, on purpose. The 1995 Mercury Villager Estate appeared on exactly 0 lists of exciting automotive machinery. It had sliding rear doors. It had 3 rows of seating. It had a name that evoked nothing more dangerous than a Sunday drive through a residential neighborhood at 22 miles per hour. What it also had, in the Nissan-sourced 3-liter V6 producing 151 horsepower, was the foundation of something that autocross competitors discovered almost by accident. The Villager was built on a platform shared with the Nissan Quest, which meant it had a chassis designed by engineers who actually understood handling dynamics rather than engineers whose primary concern was cup holder placement. Stripped of its rear seats and entered into SCCA minivan class competition, the Villager estate became a legitimate motorsport weapon. Its low center of gravity relative to other minivans, its precise steering, and its willingness to be pushed beyond what its domestic competitors could manage made it quietly devastating on a closed course. Nobody feared the minivan. That was exactly the advantage. Number 5. The 1999 Buick Park Avenue Ultra. Buick spent the 1990s making cars for people who had decided that comfort was more important than pulse rate. And for the most part, that was a completely defensible philosophy. The Park Avenue was plush, quiet, smooth, and technologically sophisticated in ways that its conservative exterior refused to advertise. The Ultra trim added a supercharger to the 3.8-liter V6, and that decision transformed the Park Avenue from a very comfortable car into a very comfortable car that could embarrass sports sedans at highway speeds. 240 horsepower and 280 pound-feet of torque, delivered with the smoothness and civility that only a front-wheel drive Buick supercharged luxury sedan could manage. Which sounds like a sentence that should not contain exciting performance numbers. And yet, 0 to 60 in under 7 seconds. Sustained highway passing power that made European sport tourers in the same price range feel ordinary by comparison. The Park Avenue Ultra did not feel fast. That was its genius. It felt serene, elevated, unhurried, like a very polite person who is absolutely winning the argument and knows it. The boost came in silently, the speed built effortlessly, and by the time your opponent realized what was happening, the Ultra was already a quarter-mile ahead, its driver adjusting the climate control with one finger and never once raising their heart rate. Number 4. The 1992 Pontiac Bonneville SSEY. Pontiac has a complicated legacy. They built the original GTO, they built the Trans Am, they built cars that defined American performance for 2 decades, and then somewhere in the mid-1980s, they started making cautious, badge-engineered sedans that slowly drained the excitement from the brand like air from a slow puncture. The Bonneville SSEI was the exception that proved the rule. SSEI stood for Super Sport Edition with supercharger, and the supercharger was the operative word. The 3.8-liter V6 with Eaton supercharger produced 205 horsepower and 260 pound-feet of torque in 1992, which was a genuinely impressive number for a front-wheel drive family sedan that looked approximately as threatening as a library. But the SSEY had driver information systems, handling suspension, 4-wheel disc brakes, and a road feel that communicated genuine confidence through the steering wheel. On a winding back road, the Bonneville SSEY felt alive in a way that Pontiac's marketing department completely failed to communicate to anyone who might have been interested in buying one. Quarter-mile times in the high 15-second range do not sound like bragging rights until you remember that this was a full-size American luxury sedan, and the driver next to you in the Camaro was not expecting the Bonneville to still be there after the first stoplight. The SSEI deserved better. Pontiac deserved better. But that's a longer conversation for another video. Number 3. The 1998 Ford Crown Victoria Police Interceptor. Here we go again with the police cars. But this one is different because the Crown Victoria Police Interceptor became arguably the most significant sleeper story of the entire decade for one very specific reason. Everybody knew what it looked like, and everybody was terrified of it anyway. The P-71 Police Interceptor package transformed the Crown Victoria from a large, comfortable rear-wheel drive American sedan into a purpose-built pursuit machine that earned genuine respect from the performance community once these cars started appearing on the civilian-used market in the late 1990s. The 4.6-liter modular V8 produced 210 horsepower in police tune, which sounds modest until you add the heavy-duty cooling system, the upgraded transmission calibration, the larger rear brakes, the reinforced suspension geometry, and the fact that this engine had been specifically selected and tuned for sustained high-speed operation rather than peak showroom statistics. The Crown Victoria Police Interceptor could cruise at 130 miles per hour for extended periods without mechanical complaint, It launched cleanly, stopped hard, and handled with a stability that its enormous dimensions suggested should have been impossible. Former police interceptors bought at government auctions in the late 1990s were among the greatest performance bargains in American automotive history. A fully sorted rear-wheel drive performance sedan with heavy-duty everything for under $5,000. Engineers knew, enthusiasts who paid attention knew, and everyone else just saw a big Ford sedan and felt vaguely anxious for reasons they couldn't quite explain. Number 2. The 1996 Chevrolet Impala SS with the LT4 engine. We already mentioned the standard Impala SS, but there was a version of that car that almost nobody knew existed, ordered by almost nobody, and which represents one of the greatest factory sleeper upgrades in American automotive history. The LT4 engine was a high-output version of the LT1, developed originally for the Corvette Grand Sport. 330 horsepower, 340 pound-feet of torque, roller rocker arms, a more aggressive camshaft, higher compression, and heads that flowed considerably more air than the standard LT1 could manage. It was a race-bred engine dropped into a production sedan with almost zero fanfare and even less marketing support. An Impala SS with the LT4 could run quarter-mile times in the low 14-second range. 0 to 60 came in well under 6 seconds. This was a 4-door, full-size American sedan with a trunk large enough to carry a reasonable amount of furniture, running times that would embarrass dedicated sports cars. Chevrolet made no particular noise about the LT4 option. Dealers barely mentioned it. Most buyers of Impala SS models had no idea the engine even existed as an option, which means the number of LT4 Impala SS cars actually produced was vanishingly small. If you have ever seen one at a car show and wondered why everyone standing near it had that specific expression of quiet reverence usually reserved for objects of genuine historical significance, now you understand exactly why. Number 1. The 1992 Oldsmobile Toronado Trofeo. And here we arrive at the one that genuinely almost nobody remembers, which is remarkable because what Oldsmobile built inside the Toronado Trofeo deserves to be remembered by everyone who has ever cared about American automotive engineering. The Toronado had been around since 1966, a front-wheel drive personal luxury coupe that spent its entire existence being respected by engineers and ignored by enthusiasts who wanted their performance delivered through the rear wheels in the traditional manner. By 1992, the Toronado was in its final generation, barely clinging to existence, and Oldsmobile knew it. So, they built the Trofeo, the 3.8-liter supercharged V6 producing 210 horsepower, sat transversely under a hood that wore absolutely no identifying information, suggesting anything unusual was happening underneath it. The Trofeo looked like a luxury coupe for someone approaching retirement with considerable grace and a moderate collection of fine timepieces. What it drove like was something else entirely. The chassis was taut. The suspension was tuned with the kind of precision Oldsmobile reserved for vehicles they actually cared about. The supercharged V6 delivered its power in a smooth, progressive wave that built relentlessly from low RPM all the way to the top of the range. 0 to 60 in around 7 seconds from a front-wheel drive coupe that weighed over 3,500 pounds was genuinely impressive for 1992. But the Trofeo had something that transcended raw performance numbers. It had the Driver Information Center, one of the most sophisticated onboard computer systems installed in any production car of that era. It monitored oil life, tire pressure, fuel economy, and system diagnostics in real time through a dashboard that looked like the control panel of a small aircraft. This was a car that was smarter, faster, and more sophisticated than almost anything else wearing an American badge in 1992, and it sold in numbers so small that finding one today requires either extraordinary luck, considerable determination, or both. The Toronado Trofeo was Oldsmobile's final statement, their last real argument that they belonged in the conversation about serious automotive engineering. It was a car ahead of its time, wearing a disguise so effective that even the people who bought it sometimes didn't fully understand what they had. That is the purest definition of a sleeper, not just a car that goes faster than it looks, but a car that thinks deeper than it appears, hides more than it reveals, and rewards the people curious enough to look past the badge and discover what's actually underneath. The 1990s produced minivans and economy cars and sensible family transportation by the millions. But hiding inside that decade, wearing the most ordinary disguises American automotive engineering could construct, were machines that rewrote expectations, destroyed assumptions, and proved that performance has never been about what something looks like. It has always been about what it can do when nobody is watching. These 15 cars understood that better than almost anything built in that era. And the fact that most of them are still unknown today means the sleeper tradition is alive, well, and quietly waiting at the next stoplight. Subscribe if you want more stories about the cars that history forgot but should never have. And drop in the comments which one of these you would actually own. The correct answer is the station wagon. Obviously,